There is a question that has quietly begun circulating in military circles, inside think tanks, in government briefings, and increasingly in public conversations around the world. It is a question that sounds simple on the surface, but becomes much more unsettling the longer you think about it. Can the United States still win a modern war using the strategy that has defined its military power for the last 3 decades? That strategy has a name many people have heard before: shock and awe. The phrase has appeared in documentaries, news coverage, and political debates, often repeated as if its meaning were obvious. But few people stop to ask where the idea actually came from, what assumptions it relies on, and whether those assumptions still hold in the world we live in today. To understand this doctrine, we need to go back to the strategic environment that shaped modern American military thinking. After World War II, the world entered a period unlike anything in human history. 2 enormous superpowers emerged from the ashes of the war: the United States and the Soviet Union. Both possessed vast industrial capacity, both maintained massive armies, and most importantly, both possessed nuclear weapons capable of destroying entire cities within minutes. The presence of nuclear weapons created a strange and deeply fragile balance. For the first time, the 2 most powerful nations on Earth could not fight each other directly without risking the destruction of both societies. This situation produced a strategic logic known as mutually assured destruction, often abbreviated as MAD. The idea was brutally simple. If one side launched nuclear weapons, the other side would retaliate with equal or greater force, ensuring that both countries would suffer catastrophic destruction. In such a world, victory becomes meaningless because both sides lose. This nuclear stalemate forced the United States to rethink how military power should be used. Direct confrontation between nuclear superpowers was too dangerous, so the American military began focusing on projecting overwhelming conventional power in regional conflicts. The goal was not merely to defeat an opponent, but to demonstrate such overwhelming technological and operational superiority that resistance would collapse almost immediately. From this thinking emerged the doctrine that would later be called shock and awe. The concept itself is deceptively simple. Instead of fighting long, grinding wars of attrition, the idea is to strike an enemy with such speed, precision, and intensity at the very beginning of a conflict that the opponent's entire system collapses. Command centers are destroyed. Communication networks are disabled. Leadership structures are eliminated, military units lose coordination, panic spreads, and the political leadership that holds the system together falls apart. If executed successfully, the war ends before it truly begins. The enemy does not slowly lose strength. Instead, the enemy loses the ability to function as a coherent system. For a time, this strategy appeared remarkably successful. The first Gulf War in 1991 demonstrated the extraordinary technological advantage possessed by the United States. Precision-guided munitions struck targets with unprecedented accuracy. Radar installations and air defense systems were dismantled in a matter of hours. Iraqi command structures collapsed under the weight of overwhelming air power. More than a decade later, the invasion of Iraq in 2003 seemed to confirm the same lesson. American forces launched a massive air campaign combined with rapid ground advances, and within weeks, the Iraqi government had fallen. Observers around the world concluded that warfare had entered a new era. Technology, precision weapons, and overwhelming initial force appeared capable of ending conflicts quickly while minimizing casualties for the technologically superior side. But history rarely stands still, and the world that produced those early demonstrations of shock and awe no longer exists. The enemies that powerful nations confront today are not organized the same way that traditional armies were organized during the late 20th century. The assumptions that once made the doctrine so effective are now being challenged by changes in military structure, technology, economics, and ideology. Shock and awe depends on one critical assumption, that the enemy's power is centralized. It assumes there is a leadership hierarchy that can be identified and destroyed, a capital city, a central command structure, communication networks that connect the leadership to the battlefield. When these nodes are destroyed, the entire system collapses because soldiers and commanders no longer know what to do. But modern military organizations are increasingly structured in ways that deliberately avoid this vulnerability. Many forces now operate using decentralized command systems. Instead of waiting for orders from a central authority, units are trained to operate independently with clear strategic objectives. If communication is cut off, they continue fighting according to predefined plans. Destroying the leadership does not necessarily end the conflict. It simply removes one layer of coordination while the rest of the system keeps moving. Another challenge comes from the growing importance of asymmetrical warfare. In a traditional war, 2 sides confront each other using similar types of military equipment and tactics. But asymmetrical warfare occurs when one side deliberately avoids matching the enemy's strengths and instead exploits weaknesses. Imagine a technologically advanced military deploying aircraft carriers, stealth bombers, satellites, and precision missiles costing millions of dollars. Now imagine the opposing side using small drones costing tens of thousands of dollars each. These drones can travel long distances, carry explosive payloads, and strike power plants, oil facilities, military bases, or transportation hubs. They are cheap to produce and easy to launch in large numbers. Now consider the defensive response. Advanced missile defense systems can intercept incoming drones, but those interceptors often cost hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars each. In some cases, multiple interceptors are required to guarantee a successful interception. Suddenly, the economic logic of the battlefield begins to shift. A drone costing $50,000 may require $2 million worth of defensive missiles to stop. If hundreds of drones are launched simultaneously, the defending side may spend hundreds of millions of dollars in a single night to neutralize weapons that cost a fraction of that amount to produce. This dynamic creates a powerful economic asymmetry in which the weaker side forces the stronger side to spend resources at an unsustainable rate. Technological change is accelerating this trend. In the past, advanced weapons systems required massive industrial infrastructure. Only the largest and wealthiest nations could afford to build modern military hardware. Today, the barriers to entry for certain types of technology are falling. Commercial electronics, global supply chains, and widely available software tools make it possible for smaller actors to develop capabilities that were once reserved for major powers. Drones, cyber warfare tools, and precision targeting systems can be developed by relatively small teams with limited resources. As this technological diffusion continues, the monopoly on advanced military capabilities that major powers once enjoyed becomes less secure. There is also a deeper factor that military planners often struggle to quantify: ideology and belief. Not all wars are fought by professional soldiers motivated primarily by duty or compensation. Some conflicts are driven by powerful ideological or religious commitments. When fighters believe they are defending their homeland, their faith, or their identity, traditional calculations about risk and survival begin to change. Destroying infrastructure does not necessarily produce surrender. Eliminating leadership does not necessarily break morale. In some cases, intense military pressure can strengthen resolve rather than weaken it, reinforcing the belief that the struggle itself carries moral or existential significance. When these elements are combined, decentralized command structures, asymmetrical economic dynamics, rapidly evolving technology, and deeply motivated fighters, the effectiveness of strategies built around shock and awe becomes far less certain. If the opening strikes of a conflict fail to produce the expected collapse, the doctrine offers few clear answers about what happens next. A war that was expected to end quickly may instead evolve into a prolonged struggle. The consequences of such a scenario would extend far beyond the battlefield. The modern global economy is deeply interconnected. Energy markets, financial systems, and supply chains are linked in ways that allow regional disruptions to spread rapidly across the world. A prolonged conflict involving major powers could trigger spikes in oil prices, disruptions to global trade routes, financial instability, and widespread economic shocks. In such an environment, the cost of war would not be measured only in military casualties, but in global economic turmoil affecting billions of people. This is why discussions about military doctrine matter even to those who have little interest in military affairs. Doctrines shape how leaders think about war. They influence the assumptions decision-makers bring into crises and determine the strategies they consider viable. If those assumptions are based on models of warfare that no longer reflect reality, leaders may find themselves making decisions that produce consequences they never anticipated. The doctrines that dominate military thinking today were largely developed in a very different strategic environment. They emerged during the Cold War and were refined through conflicts against opponents that lacked the capacity to counter American technological superiority. But the world is changing. New technologies, new forms of organization, and new economic realities are reshaping the battlefield, which leads to the deeper question now being asked quietly in military planning rooms around the world. Not simply whether a future conflict might occur, but whether the strategies powerful nations believe will win those wars are still suited to the realities of modern warfare. Because if the assumptions behind shock and awe no longer hold, the next major conflict could reveal that weakness in the most painful way imaginable.